Question is, what can we learn from failed companies that try to do their best in property investment, yet circumstances, external or internal, actually didn't make that possible? Let's have a look at the case of Signature Group, which it was a scandal that happened in between 2020 2022. A business that was growing really well, investing all over the UK, then just went into administration. Let's see a little bit about the background of it, and at the end, we'll focus a little bit in terms of what can be learned for you to avoid this in terms of investment in properties and what my opinion is on what could have happened. So let's start by looking at the Signature Group, basically. And this company was founded by a couple in Liverpool in about 2010, Lawrence Katie and Katie Kenwright. They started with the project of building a big conglomerate of properties, and they decided to focus on historic landmark, historic buildings, hopefully located in the center of the cities. That kind of was their financial model. And in terms of funding, they decided to sell fractions of those buildings, like hotel rooms, apartments, like offices in those. And on top of that, they decided to borrow money from investors. Over 1,000 people invested in that business. So they were in the market from 2010 to about 2020, to about 12 years. And they were operating, doing this across the UK, across, that was, for example, some of these hotels, which I have here, which are the Shankly Hotel. This was in Liverpool, the George Best Hotel, which actually never finished and became the relic building in the center of Belfast, and the city center of Belfast. And they actually were evolving into getting a disused cruise liner, which they were advertising as to a hotel that was going to be moored in the London's Canary Wharf. And that was it's attractive. That was something they were playing, trying to do, innovating, and bringing a lot more of luxury into what they were doing. And to attract the funding for those projects from those investors, they were offering high returns between about 8% to 15%, which is above normal terms that you would get in certain areas in the country. Meaning, for example, for a 15% return, you would have to have like a really well HMO with very low costs, or at least very much optimized high rent, so you can achieve that sort of value. And they were guaranteeing those returns to investors. Meaning, if they didn't make money in certain project, they still had to pay. That's their just one of the most important weaknesses. Now, they were doing this, as I said, by selling individual hotel rooms, apartments, offices, etc. All of this. That's what we're doing. Now, the collapse happened basically partly the owners are blaming COVID. They're saying that COVID hit the hospitality sector really hard, which it did. But then that's where the problem starts, which may also have exposed some fragility within this business and the model that the founders were using, which was effectively to develop these buildings, sell it at a fraction, borrow money from investors, and then buy a new building to develop in the same way. Now, that was rapid expansion, highly leveraged business, and then returns which were guaranteed. There, the explosive mixture starts to happen. Now, the timeline of this is that the business went into administration. Some of its flagship hotels went into receivership, meaning they went to be foreclosed and probably taken by the lenders as well, because they couldn't pay the mortgages on those buildings. Now, what this meant is that it is said that losses of up to 140 million pounds were incurred because of this failure. And many of those investors who basically paid to buy a room or lend money to the business, they won't be able to recover that money. Now, what's happening as an investigation for the process, which is the Serious Fraud Office, now they started in early 2024, they started launching a criminal probe to understand whether this is something that couldn't be avoided, meaning the business was so good that the only reason for it to fail was definitely COVID 2000, or they need to prove now into whether this is a Ponzi scheme. If this was the case where they use funds wrongly and then misappropriated them using them for their projects, or it was actually something natural into a business cycle. And that's what they need to understand. That's what needs to happen. And basically, at the moment they are finding evidence, this takes a long time. It's now about 5 years since the company went into administration. And now, because about 1,000 investors who were affected here probably complained, and this case was open, then now this formal investigation is taking place. In fact, several of their offices were raided by the Serious Fraud Office, and then 4 of the shareholders were arrested and then released. But obviously, investigation continues by the Serious Fraud Office. Now, the impact on these investors is obviously a financial loss. Many of them would have put life savings into this, expecting a guaranteed return and expecting not to have to do a lot. Now, here is where the problem starts. Guaranteed returns is something that could be only guaranteed for a while the market is good. But then what COVID-19 showed to many service, accommodation agents, and many people who were enjoying a good life from the investment in property, then they saw what happens with the tide goes out. You can see who is naked. And therefore, they understood that such a thing as high returns, high guaranteed returns with no work in it is something that is you need to be really wary of, because difficult to get. If a business is going to guarantee returns and is going to keep growing and you don't have to do anything and you don't do any due diligence into this business, then that's potentially what is going to happen. These investors now are trying to get some of their money back, even though they probably are in the second or third position in the payment order, meaning their lenders who lend money for the building, the mortgages, those will get paid first. And if there is anything left, then the other investors. That's the way it works. And that's one of the first considerations that you as an investor need to understand. Now, if you lend money to a business like this and you have no other collateral, then that's a problem. It depends how, for example, Signature Group structure the whole thing. If they have everything in one limited business, then basically everything would have been lost. But then if they had different limited companies, which probably is what happens, one collapsed, the other started collapsing, and they have a segregation of assets that if they use the right consultants, lawyers, tax planners, maybe they manage to save some of that portfolio for them. Maybe not everything is lost, but it depends. Is the reason I'm mentioning this is because when you are going to do this kind of investments, you're going to buy a room in a hotel, or you're going to buy a apartment which is not being built yet. You're not investing in property, you are investing in a business, so you're one step behind with a lot more risk, because you are investing in a business which, if it goes under, then your investment goes under. That's why for me is a lot better to buy a freehold property which I have full control of, and I'm not buying leasehold, or let alone a room in a hotel, which again depends. In this case, it would depend on the development business to work. And then it would depend on who that company appoints to run that hotel. So you can actually get some money out of it. You see, you are very much removed from the control of your investment. And that's combined with high returns, that doesn't make sense. Normally, for example, when we invest in property and we have high returns, is because we've had to work really hard in terms of making a project work. And there are problems and there are different difficulties, different challenges with builders, with materials, with the building itself that you always have to sort out, but you have the control of the project. You're not removed from making the decisions that are going to make your money work. And that's what happens here. That's why these kind of schemes I don't like. And you can find them. You can still find them. Go to Supla, Rightmove, or to the open market and try to find hotel rooms for sale, or buying from blueprints. As I said before, that's a bigger risk. You're not investing in property at that point. You're investing in a business that might not deliver you property, and that's what I don't like it. This is a big lesson, and that's what I talked about. So lessons and warnings from this process for you to understand that what I said to people, you need to look at the strategies that you are going to specialize in property. Hopefully you specialize in one where you have direct control of your investment. That's number one. Now, red flag number one in this process is that if it's high returns and somebody else is doing everything for you and you don't know what the strategy entails from beginning to end, don't do it. Try to understand, learn more about the strategy, and then you can go in with at least the capacity to ask questions. So at least you can pivot or change decisions that have direct impact on how that investment is being run. Very, very important. The second red flag is this strategy of rooms, individual rooms in a business. It's not even flats. And then the strategy as well of buying from blueprints. Again, if you don't have direct control into the investment, then you should feel uncomfortable and your due diligence should be increased. And what kind of due diligence you should do in these sort of businesses is, for example, understand with financial statements for the last 3 years if that business is making money. What is the EBITDA? What is the cash flow? What is the free cash flow? Is it actually making money? What's the reputation of that business? Anything can change for any good business, but if you start investing in a bad business, then you've not done your due diligence. So when you invest your money trying to audit that business and find data that lets you understand how that money is being used and what the risk is in terms of managing that business. Very important. Now, the other one red flag in this case is rapid expansion. Rapid expansion is good, but then it can mask things like Ponzi schemes, where the business is expanding and is reporting some sort of returns, good returns, but those returns are partly because there are investors putting fresh money in it and not because the business is generating that money. So very, very critical that you understand all this and then you do your due diligence, have a panel of experts, have a panel of people who have done it, interview people who have invested with these people before. But the problem there is it only gives you part of the picture, because if it's a Ponzi scheme, they might not know they're in a Ponzi scheme. That's what normally happens with those. But then understand due diligence of the business you're investing. Get yourself in a position where you have control of that investment, the most possible control, so you can change the project manager, so you can change the builder, so you can say, stop, I don't want that, I don't think this is working. Yes, that means you'll have to do more work, but wouldn't you do that for the money that you've been working for the whole of your life? And that's what I normally do. I like to get into a position where I get the person who's working for me, I can ask questions and I can understand if that person knows or not about what they're talking. And that way I reduce risk, because as an investor with your investor hat, your main job is to find reasons to say no to these investments or to reduce that risk as much as possible. So these kind of things don't happen, or at least you reduce the likelihood of it, because sometimes it's impossible to predict it. But if you have, for example, investments, which I talk about a lot about this. If you have an investment, if you buy a property for which you can apply at least two strategies in case one of them doesn't work, you can apply another one or a third one, and then you do that within the law, within the regulations that exist, then you probably have a sound investment that you can trust, that you have flexibility to move around. This is Noel Cardona. This is propertycashflow.co.uk. If you want to know more, also send me a message to info@propertycashflow.co.uk. If you want to have a chat, we can book a conversation, 15 minutes conversation. If you have properties that you want managed in Liverpool, Wirral, or you want to invest in those areas, please let me know. I'll be happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you very much and see you in the next one.